Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm based in Brussels, in Belgium, where there is a special sport week with the hosting of the Cycling World Championship. And on Sunday, we have the big race of professional riders, including Alaphilippe, Almeida, Van der Poel, and the Belgium hero Wout van Aert. Van Aert should win because all the media in Belgium said that he will be champion. And you have to know that he's capable with his victory to really unify the whole country. It's a federal country. And you have to know that in Belgium, cycling, football with the Red Devil, and social security, and maybe somewhere the King of Belgium, are the rare factors capable to unify the society of this federal country, I have to say. So here you have the first example of what we call social impact thanks to sport. Good afternoon, my name is Laurent THIEULE. I'm the president of Sports and Citizenship. And I'm happy to welcome all of you for this special conference in the frame of the European Week of Sport, in partnership with our friend of Abreu Advogados in Lisbon. And we have our friend taking the floor on behalf of their entity. We have around 100 and more participants today to this conference, which is a great success. And we are here to talk about measuring the social impact of sports. So my first effort will be maybe to give a definition of what do we mean by social impact, and second, elements to know how we can measure the social impact of sport. So first of all, what we call in our jargon social impact is how can sports really influence, contribute in a tangible way in driving and accompanying, and I have to say strengthening the social cohesion, the social change, in order to reduce inequality, in order to improve collective conditions for human development. This is the first definition I would say. When we are talking about social impact, it can concern not only big events like the Olympic Games in Paris, and we have later on a testimony about this big event in Paris, but also different policies driven by different entities, European Commission, mayor of a city, national government. Can mean the impact of a program like Erasmus Plus, of project, even of local initiative. Personally, in my football club, I like to mention in Krainem, we welcome young refugees. So we have to measure the social impact of welcoming these social program, refugees, in the community of the club, in the community of refugees. So I take another example. In Belgium, we have the Royal Belgium Football Association, which launched 3 months ago a campaign with an apps to fight against racism. And now they want to measure the impact of this policy in all the 4,000 amateur clubs in Belgium. So here we have another example of what do we mean by social impact. Impact is on a territory, a local club, a region, a member state, European Union territory, and it targets, as you can understand, specific community. What we want to achieve with this conference is to give visibility on the sports scene to this social impact first, and because we are convinced that now social impact really matters. Second, I would like to give some elements to know how to measure the social impact. So first, you have to understand that will be developed in the conference, but you have the analytic approach where we have to give and to provide the tools, innovative and new technology and methodology of new tools to political, to managers, decision makers. All these people in the public domain or in the private sector, investing money, budget in different fields of sports, and they have to know what is the return on investment measuring the social impact. So what is the social impact of a public or private sector money that they can expect? So I have to say that measuring the social impact of sports must be achieved in a concrete logic materialization of a sports policy, which is very concrete thing to say. We have the analytic approach, and then we have the concrete approach to prove to the decision makers and to give them different tools to evaluate the social impact of their own investment. Finally, at the end of this conference, the three objectives of sport and citizenships would be first to propose to open this debate at the European level, because we think that the right level to evaluate the social impact is the European one. Second, we have elaborated a so-called memorandum of understanding with sport and citizenships, proposing a first frame of acting for this social impact. So we call for new partners, potential partners, to join this memorandum of understanding provided by sport and citizenships in the coming weeks and months. And finally, we want and have the ambition to propose to create the first European network of actors that will be involved in the social impact and the way of how to measure it. That's it for my introduction. Now, I would like to maybe start the moderation of this conference and give the floor to Fernando VEIGA GOMES, who is a lawyer in the associate cabinet of Abreu Advogados. Fernando, the floor is yours. Thank you for being there, and happy to see you in this conference. Thank you, Fernando.
Thank you, Laurent. Thank you very much. Thank you for, I'd like to thank Sports and Citizenship Think Tank for organizing this event. As you know, the plan was to have not an online event, but to have an event here in Lisbon. Unfortunately, the COVID pandemic situation, as you know, is preventing us from gathering together and share, of course, all the good things that we're going to learn for sure in this conference. But it is what it is. We're happy to be here, and so a big thank you again to Laurent and to Sport and Citizenship. As Laurent said, we're also happy as our Abreu Advogados, as Laurent said, to sponsor this event. We're very happy with that. We have strong and sound leading a sports law practice here in Portugal, together with my colleague Alexandre Mestre, that is you also hear for sure later this afternoon. And of course, as I said, we're happy to sponsor this event. And we do all kinds of sports, all kinds of work, of course, mainly football, but we do a lot of other activities. We work with the sports federations, with the sports associations, with clubs, with players, with sponsors, with investors. So we do all the range of sports legal work in the country. And as I said, we have a leading practice. This is absolutely a very interesting topic, the measuring the social impact of sport, and I'm sure we will hear very interesting discussions and presentations later on. But just let me, when I was invited to speak to do these opening remarks, I recalled my experience for 12 years. I was the chairman of the Lisbon Soccer Association, the chairman of the general meeting, and during those 12 years, I was lucky to have contact with the amateur football reality in the Lisbon region, in the district of Lisbon. And just to let you know, we're talking about around 30,000 football players every weekend that play football. And during these weekends, and I'm sure that you realize that these small clubs, these small amateur clubs, with unknown directors that do all their best for their kids, for their families, and all that, with the support of the parents and the families, they do, and they replace, in a way, they replace the government, they replace the authorities, and in a social way, because I'm sure that we all realize that in small neighborhoods, in small localities in the Lisbon area, for sure these kids, while they're playing football, and for sure after playing football, they're not thinking about doing anything wrong. They're not thinking about entering into any kind of a bad behavior or getting addicted to drugs or anything like that. All they want is to play football. Not only is healthy for them, but for sure it has a big social impact in their lives and in the lives of their families. And I'm talking about amateur football. I'm not talking about any kind of professional football. So this was, as I said, a very interesting experience that I had. I've seen many football matches with all ages of amateur football in the Lisbon area for 12 years, as I said, and it was a very, very interesting experience that I would, of course, like to share. It will introduce the topic for the interesting discussions that will follow. So I have not much to say, Laurent.
Thank you
again,
so
thank
much.
you. I will. I think the next we have a keynote speaker, which is Vivian HOFFMANN, that I'm sure you will introduce.
Fernando, I would like to thank you a lot. I have to say that there are famous professional clubs in Lisbon. You didn't mention them, but I know you support one of them. Thank you so much, Fernando.
I know. I support Belenenses, which is the third club of Lisbon.
Okay, great. Thank you, Fernando. I would like to welcome Vivian HOFFMANN, a former colleague from the European Commission. Happy to see you again, Vivian. You are Deputy General Director of DG EAC at the European Commission, in charge of sport in particular. For you, it's a special week because it's a conference is in the frame of the European Week of Sports, and I give you the floor. Thank you for being there, Vivian.
Thanks a lot, Laurent. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for this opportunity to represent the European Commission at this conference on measuring the social impact of sport. It is a very important topic, and this week is indeed a very special one. As you know, yesterday, Commissioner Maria Gabriel opened the 7th edition of the European Week of Sport in Slovenia. And it is very encouraging to see that this celebration of sport has developed into a yearly pan-European event for sport organizations, partners, citizens in the European Union and beyond. So let me first of all thank Sport and Citizenship for your involvement in the European Week of Sport since the beginning. Through all those years, the Be Active message has reached over 71 million people from 42 countries joining the week's activities. And we hope that this year will yet be a very successful edition. As you know, the goal of the week is to encourage people from all generations and backgrounds and levels of fitness to embrace more active lifestyles, and also to raise awareness about the place of sport in our societies. So one could say that the European Week of Sport is a tool to maximize the power of sport to create a positive impact on society. And we all agree that sport is beneficial for society as a whole, for communities, for individuals practicing sport, as well as for employment in this sector. The impact of sport is manifold, from fitness, health, well-being to social inclusion and contribution to the economy, from individual to collective achievements and team spirit. And beyond those aspects, it is clear that sport is about values. Sport at its best is about fairness, respect, solidarity, inclusion, and tolerance. And it is an antidote to exclusion. It can precisely offer a welcoming environment and opportunities for personal development and acquisition of skills for people who have fewer chances or people who are in more difficult situations. So sport can bring so many benefits, we all agree, and it can bring those benefits in many different areas of life and of society. Some of them are easier to quantify than others. In the European Commission, we are working to use our policies and programs to maximize its impact. And as you know, we have two main tools to support sport, which are our campaigns and initiatives such as the European Week of Sport and our Be Active, Be Inclusive Sport Awards and the Erasmus Plus program. The Be Inclusive EU Sport Awards, which you know are organized every year. They recognize the work of sport organizations with minorities, refugees, people with disabilities, groups at risk, or any group of people for whom sport offers much more than just physical activity. I would like to mention one of last year's winner, and that is Surf Art, Atrevete, Realizate, Transformate. It is a Portuguese project which uses surfing as a means to develop young people's autonomy and potential. It focuses on youth with fewer opportunities from a community in Lisbon as well. Many other projects have demonstrated how the European sports sector can contribute to social cohesion and citizenship. This year's competition is still open until the 21st of October, and I'm sure we will again see many new and inspiring projects, and I would like you to promote the award among your networks in order to increase the number of applications further. The second tool, as you know very well, is the Erasmus Plus program, which was adopted earlier this year, and under which sport will benefit from 470 million euro, which is twice as much as in the previous program. So we will not only continue to support the sports sector as we have done previously, from grassroots to sport established institutions, but we will now have the means to do more. And we want to ensure that increased funding also means increased participation. We want funding to be channeled to a broader variety of organizations and participants in order to have a wide social impact precisely. Therefore, we have simplified the access to the program and made the rules more flexible. We hope that this will attract many of those who have not yet taken part in the program so far. I would also like to give you another example of a project which is in sport, all in and para coach, which contribute to the development of sport opportunities and competitions for European athletes with a disability as part of the World Paralympic movement. We want to make full use of the power that sport brings to bring people together from all the backgrounds. Playing in a local amateur club may well be the first occasion for a migrant to have closer contacts with local people. And we are really well aware of the role that sport organizations play in facilitating integration. We have many very positive and encouraging examples. And this is the philosophy behind the Erasmus Plus FIRE project, an initiative which is led, of course, by Sport and Citizenship, that aims to promote football as a means of inclusion, participation, and access to sport for asylum seekers, refugees, and migrants. So this is a very good example of what football can do and what sport can do and what Erasmus funded projects can do. So we congratulate you on this project. And we are looking forward to see many more of those. Ladies and gentlemen, we are all aware of the benefits of sport for our societies, yet quantifying them can be difficult. We already see developments in this area, especially in the context of measuring the impact of sport on young people's employability. A specific study was conducted 4 years ago in this area, and one of the focus areas of this work was the development and measurement of skills that are relevant for employability, such as communication skills, conflict management, problem solving, teamwork, leadership, to name a few. And I'm very pleased to see that Professor Mark Teboim is with us today, who was one of the authors of the study. From the Commission perspective, I can assure you that through EU sport policies and through the Erasmus Plus program, we will help maximize the positive impact of sport on our societies in close cooperation with all the stakeholders. I look very much forward to your discussions on measuring the social impact of sport and to your findings and insights that can inspire our future work. Before I finish, I would like to thank you for your contributions to the European Week of Sport, and I invite you to join the campaign, which has started yesterday with the launch of the Healthy Lifestyle for All initiative. I thank you very much for your attention and for this opportunity to speak, and I look forward to the outcomes of your discussion. Thank you once again.
Thank you very much, Vivian. Thank you so much for these kind words for 5 projects and sport citizenship involvement in the field of sport. Thank you so much. I would like to say a friendly hello to one personality, Alexandre Mestre, who is one of the founders of our think tank years ago. Alexander was the former Portugal Secretary of State for Youth and Sports. Now he's a lawyer in the Abreu Advogados cabinet, and I'm very happy to see him among us once again. Thank you for everything you did for us, Alexander. Now we have to open now. Thank you for these 2 introductions from Fernando and Vivian. Now we have to go to 2 round tables. One would be entitled Initiating a European Dialogue on Measuring the Social Impact of Sports, and the second one would be supporting actors on the ground through the measurement of the social impact of sport. So for the first one, I give the floor to Clara Gauthier. Clara is one of our officers within our headquarters in Brussels, and I give Clara the moderation of this round table. The floor is yours, Clara.
Yes, thank you, Laurent. Good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am really delighted to be hosting this roundtable on initiating a European dialogue on measuring the social impact of sport. So first of all, I would like to welcome Michael SERNEELS, the representative of the Directorate General for Education, Youth, Sport and Culture at the European Commission. We are glad to have you as part of the European Week of Sport, an initiative we are glad to be partner of. We also welcome Mark Teboim, a professor. So thank you both for being here. But we are also glad to have with us Vitor PATACO, President of the Portuguese Youth Institute. So good afternoon. Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to have you and to start this conference with your opinion on the issue of measuring the social impact of sport. So my first question for you will be, as a representative of the Portuguese sport movement, what is your opinion on the question of sport and social impact? How does it is related to your internal policy in Portugal? And would the European methodology be useful for the policy you implemented? So the floor is yours, Vitor PATACO. Thank you.
Thank you, Clara. Thank you, Mr. Laurent, dear speakers, and all those that are with us online. Before diving into the topic, I would like also to congratulate you for this initiative, the Sport Citizenship, for the invitation. And our congratulations and compliments also to your partners of the European Week of Sport, European Commission, and Abreu Advogados cabinet in the person of Mr. Fernando VEIGA and Mr. Alexandre Mestre. In fact, I'm also in Slovenia at the general meetings directors that has already ended, and at the launching of the European Week of Sport, which has already occurred, as Mr. Vivian HOFFMANN highlighted. So it's our pleasure to have the chance to share some thoughts on such a relevant the social impact of sport. We all know that and recognize that sport has a wide range of benefits to societies and to our citizens. Research and practice have shown us time and again how it generates positive externalities, from the improved health and well-being to our populations, to economic development, social cohesion, pro-social behaviors, reduction of anti-social behaviors, and so many other issues. This is present in our daily action in the Portuguese Institute of Sport and Youth, as the national government body responsible for the implementation and monitorization of national policies in the fields of sport and youth. And when we talk about citizens' engagement in sport, of course, the preparation of elite athletes, sports infrastructures, urban planning, coach training, ultimately, at the end of the day, we are dealing with issues and solutions that are eminently social. So despite how tangible they may be, as in the case of infrastructure, such actions, will lead to some reaction and change of the citizens' behaviors on how they relate with their communities and built environment, and how they lead their lives. A good example of a change in people's behavior caused by the change of the environment are the pedestrian or bicycle path that very quickly lead to a change in habits, because people simply start using these facilities, these infrastructures. So they change his behavior and become active using that facilities. So in this perspective, and make the bridge to our presidency, we also held in our minds while working in the framework of the presidency of the Council of the EU, when we set sport innovation and also sport diplomacy as our main priorities in the field of sport. Our vision for sport innovation, in one that resulted from a fruitful discussion with the member states and the stakeholders of the sector, and which was given shape through the Council conclusion on sport innovation that you can consult on the official documents. This vision is one based on the overarching, holistic, cross-sectoral and also multi-level approach. This means that social innovation must also be considered and explored in understanding how we can best intervene towards boosting the benefits of sport in each of our capacities. On our practical level, we try to fully understand the kind of impact that public investment in sport has, not only to promote a more efficient use of the resources at our disposal, but also to support the adaptation and creation of better solutions that better meet the challenges we face on a national level and that occur to those we face as also a union. But we can only do so properly, adequately, if we measure, if we evaluate and adapt our intervention backed by reliable information, that's for sure, And thus is crucial that we continue to develop more robust instruments for this purpose, and that these are further integrated in our daily action. We have so many instruments to do that. To achieve this is necessary to create links across sectors and levels of different levels of governance. Additionally, being able to effectively communicate the results and action must be a priority. We in sport already know the positive impact it has, the sport, but we need to be able to translate this information into a language that policymakers in other areas we will also understand that language. So more than that, we need data and evidence to support and boost concrete actions and decisions, and that we are trying to do. Sport diplomacy too has a role to play in the discussion of the social impact of sport. Indeed, sport is a glue that brings us closer, breaking down the barriers associated with stereotypes, social inequalities, as we know, cultural and religious differences, all and tensions among others. As part of a union on 27 member states, there is also an added element to this matter. We are not working alone within the national borders. We all work and cooperate towards common goals. So it only makes sense that we do the same in this regard, while understanding and respecting the specificity and competencies of the member states, of course. Thus, we believe that at the European level, our efforts have to be directed to collaboration in the harmonization of measures, to allow for comparability of data, to policy guidance, and to sharing information and good practices to ensure that we are building on each other's work. That's a key question for us. So I would like to end by mentioning the Lisboa call on sport innovation that constitute itself one of the major initiatives that highlight the legacy of the Portuguese presidency. Indeed, this initiative intends to emphasize the contribution of sport innovation at social, digital, technological, educational, environmental, health, etc. And you can find more information of Lisboa Call at the site Lisboa Call, and you maybe can support that Lisboa Call because it is a way to get together on this path of innovation, and it is good for the people, for the citizens, for the health of our entire Europe. So thank you for your time. It is my single thoughts. I have the compliments of my Secretary of State because he was not allowed to, there's not the agenda to be here, but he asked me to say some words. So here we are. I need another webinar, so I'm sorry, but I can't stay with you all the time, but thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. PATACO. We are really glad to have you within our intervenant during this conference. And indeed, as you mentioned, innovation has been one of the main priority of the Portugal presidency of the Council of the European Union. And at Sport Citizenship, we all have to take into account the innovative aspect of new measure methodology, and your activity were a huge inspiration in the work we are doing right now. So thank you very much. We know that sport is a support competencies of the European Commission, and we are glad to see that member states like you in Portugal make it an important subject. So thank you very much. I now give the floor to our two other speakers, Marc Thibault and Michael SERNEELS. So we have had a first vision of what social impact can be, which lays the foundation and stakes of this subject. So from a European point of view, I would like to ask Michael SERNEELS, the representative of the European Commission, to describe in few sentences what is for you the definition of the social impact of sport. So Michael SERNEELS, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Clara, and thank you for Sport and Citizenship for having me. I'm very pleased to be here among a few people that I already met a very long time ago. I've spent some work together with Julien in the beginning of the white paper of sports, so we've shared already offices and some very great times. Thank you for that question, and I must say it's a very challenging question. As Mr. THIEULE already indicated at the beginning, he gave already a very brief and extensive overview of what the question and the definition of social impact of sports could be, and allow me to break it up in a few elements. We have on the first hand we have sport, which is in this request for defining it. And it's clear that sport is extremely wide and extremely broad. It goes from the individual who sports on a non-organized level to up to higher level elite athletes who compete in very high international tournaments. And we need to take these things into account when we talk about the definition, because it's quite difficult to come up with a one-size-fits-all definition for the social impact of sport. So sport is very broad in that sense. It's the regional aspect and the geographical aspect. Sports can take place in a very local community, but it can also be a global event. Besides that, we have the fact of the different sports that all have their specificities, which all could have some way of social impact, positive or negative. But besides that, there's also the aspect of the fact that when we look at the impact, it's clear that if we talk about the impact of sport in our societies, we're talking about consequences of citizens that are engaging in sport in whatever way. And there is definitely, and it has been ample proven, that there are a lot of positive impacts and consequences that are related to sport and regular sporting. But unfortunately, there is, of course, also the negative impacts that it can have. And I think it's important that we take that also along, and if we try to define the definition, if we try to define the social impact of sport. And then finally, if we look at the social dimension, we do sports within settings of societies. And as it has been already demonstrated by previous speakers, we are members of citizens and members of societies, and on an individual level we are impacted, but even groups are impacted and non-sportives are impacted, because we often think only of the active sports people, but we also need to take into account passive sports people and non-sports people and people who are not interested in sport. So if we try to define that social impact of sport, it is really something very complex and very difficult. And in terms of the measurement, because at the end of the day, we're talking about the measurement of the social impact of sport, we need to take that into account if we start to work on it. And that's also what, within the European Commission, we are very conscious about. That social dimension has been something that has been one of the main pillars of the sports policies that we've set up. And it is very, very hard to measure it. So in that sense, I think asking me to have a very brief definition of the social impact of sport is quite challenging. And being sportsman, I like challenges. So I hope that the contribution is more or less satisfying, and that you see that we see it as a very challenging and broad element that we need to cover also at the European level.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. SERNEELS. So I have also a challenge for Marc Thibault. I would like to ask you the same question briefly, if you can also, because we like to have the point of view of an academic. So good afternoon, Marc Thibault. So I return you the question. What is for you the definition of the social impact of sport?
Thank you, and also thank you to the organizers of this conference to invite me, and to have also the insight from academia, you might say. I think it's always interesting to combine this with policy and practitioners' views. Well, I mean, some of the things that I was planning to say was already mentioned by the previous speakers, which I think I'm not going to repeat, but I might add a few more things which it always has to do, impact always have to do actually with intended or unintended changes which occur in organizations and in communities as a consequence of policy or projects or programs. And these changes, they can be very diverse. I mean, changes, for example, health changes after being involved in sport could have an impact on, let's say, healthcare costs. So it's also, there's often an economic perspective as well relating to changes that can occur. Changes, for example, also in crime and antisocial behavior, or in pro-social behavior and citizenship, might also have an impact on cost of the criminal justice system, for example. Same can be said about changes in education of individuals that might also have an impact on productivity for society or even on community building. So I think the issue here is, of course, it's at different levels. You can have impact on individual, on group or community level, as well as on society at large. And one final thing, and I'm not going to repeat, as I mentioned the other speakers, one final thing I would add, which I think is crucially important to know, that impact is always, you might say, one of the last stages in a chain of events, chain of changes that have occurred. And if you only look at the impact and not consider basically the previous stages in this process, it doesn't make much sense. So this should be looked from a more holistic perspective. That's my view on it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Thibault. Indeed, it's nice to see that we are all sharing more or less the same definition, but because the main goal is to try to work together and to focus on what brings our common definition. So now that we have the first three opinions on the subject, we are pleased to share with you a video from Karen Mcguire, the head of the Local Employment and Economic Development Program at the OECD, who unfortunately could not be with us today, but we'll share a video. So let's watch it, and maybe we can discuss it a little bit later on.
Dear colleagues, thanks for the opportunity to join today's discussion. My name is Karen Mcguire, and I manage the OECD's Local Employment and Economic Development Program. Our mission is to help build vibrant communities through economic development and the creation of quality employment. And we're also very focused on the well-being of people, whomever they are, wherever they live. And one of the areas that we do look at in that well-being is issues of, for example, the social economy, culture, and sport. So our sports emphasis and our interest in the social impact of sports is really coming from our work on global events. And what I mean by global events are things like the Olympics, or an international capital of culture, or a World Expo. And since 2008, the OECD has been calling on host nations and international sporting bodies to ensure the sustainability and ongoing viability of such events as catalysts for local development. But these social impacts, they don't fall from the sky. They come from explicit actions that are taken before, during, and after such events. And of course, these actions need to be co-developed, those who will implement them, whether it's the public sector, private sector, and civil society, because social impact depends so much on how we implement policies and programs. So the OECD developed in 2018 a recommendation on global events and local development, which offers high-level policy guidance to help countries, regions, and cities reap greater local benefits from these events. And at the core of this recommendation is the need for transparent and legitimate frameworks for assessing economic, social, and environmental impacts. Now, earlier this year, we launched a toolkit to support implementation of that recommendation, which you can access online. And our next step is to develop additional guidance specifically on this issue of impact measurement. So what kinds of impacts? Well, OECD research already confirms that participation in sports increases students' performance and well-being, that playing sports on a regular basis can reduce the risks of obesity, anxiety disorders, self-esteem issues, bullying among adolescents, and it can help them learn to become more active and healthy adults. In addition, there are, of course, knock-on effects for other areas such as school performance. And of course, there are other issues of inclusion, gender equity, leadership skills, socio-emotional skills that are useful for work readiness, and all sorts of other issues that a lot of these sporting events that are the subject of this recommendation are seeking to promote. And again, it's looking at long-term behavior changes to increase the practice of collective or individual sports with these different social benefits. And I know we'll hear from Paris a bit later, and they're looking at all sorts of different elements of health, civic engagement, and inclusion as part of their emphasis on sports legacy. So at the OECD, as we're moving to the next phase of this guidance, we're looking to develop more common frameworks to monitor, measure, and report the impact and legacy of these events, including sports. So why is this not maybe more readily available? And of course, we at the OECD are very interested in learning about and seeing what lots of different communities are doing in terms of measuring the social impacts of sports, but because it's really critical to inform policy at different levels of government. But of course, we understand this is a very tricky task for a number of reasons. Some of these are really subjective impacts that are difficult to compare or aggregate across places. A lot of challenges in establishing causal links between what organizations do and the impact that's created. And there's also a lot of concern about ensuring that we don't create the wrong incentives where the emphasis is put on those that are most easily quantifiable, but then skew funding and interventions towards what might be easier to solve problems because it's easier to report. So we have a big challenge, and ultimately if we don't do more to measure these impacts, we can't assess some of our strategic investments in people and places, but there's a lot of work for all of us to do. And I just really emphasize the importance of the social impact measurement of sports, because it not only helps those that are specifically in the sports field, but a much wider range of public authorities, such as in health and education, who need to understand how much these investments or sports are actually helping to achieve the impacts that they're trying to achieve in their social policies. So, you know, given today's context with COVID-19 and sectors that are particularly hard hit, such as sport and culture, they are important catalysts for growth and job creation and the recovery, but they are special because they have an additional bonus of this social impact that we need to document. So, you know, the OECD looks forward to continuing to contribute to this wider effort within Europe and beyond to provide better awareness, tools, and methods and evidence on the social impacts of sports. And we welcome any of you that are interested to feel free to contact us, as we also put together different convenings to discuss the latest impacts that we can identify in the world of sports. Thank you.
So we hope that we found this, you found this video as interesting as we do. Thanks very much, Karen Mcguire, for sharing it. As Karen Mcguire said, measuring the social impact of sport does not only support sport actors, but also public authority that support projects, for example, through the Erasmus Plus program. So speaking about Erasmus Plus program, Michael Sonners, as the representative of the European Commission, can the measure of the social impact of sport project be a tool for monitoring and evaluating project support by the European Commission? Thank you. The floor is yours, Michael Turners.
Thank you, Clara. An interesting question, and it relates to what Ms. Hoffmann gave in her keynote speech and touched upon in her keynote speech. As you know, one of the main tools that we have within the European Commission is the Erasmus Plus program and the support that we give to projects via the Erasmus Plus program. And as you without doubt know, everything that we work on and the programs that we have are within a legal framework, and we have definitely already a very strong legal framework within which we work on the Erasmus Plus programs, be it our financial regulation that we need to follow in terms of evaluations and audits and monitorings of programs. But it's also interesting to see that already in the awards criteria and the evaluation criteria, and also the provisions impacts that we expect from the programs, you will see that already a high level of social impact is included in those. So from the start on, if programs are sent in and if the evaluations start in, already these projects, then the ones who send in those projects, the proposals of the projects already need to cover these elements of the impact. And then if we look at the specific impacts that we are talking about, we talk about, for example, the increased level of health and physical activity, which has an impact on health and well-being, which of course is a very important element also in under the chapter of social impact. But also we want to, via the programs, make sure that there is an increased knowledge on everything related to cross-border threats to sports in terms of match fixing, doping, but also violence, for example. But on the other hand, also we want to know more via these projects on things like discrimination, but also better support for the good governance in sport, and also more knowledge on the dual career, for example, for athletes. So all these things already are strongly related to the social dimension of sport and the impact it can have. We also look into, for example, everything that is the recognition and the increased recognition of voluntary activities in sport, and how voluntarism within sport plays its role and how it has an impact on the societies. And last but not least, and that's definitely also an important one, is that we look also already from the start in these projects to the social inclusion and the equal opportunities that are encompassed within the projects. So one could say that it's already covered from the start, and there is definitely also intermediate evaluations and follow-up of these projects, because as you also know, as project initiative takers and leaders in certain initiatives, there are intermediate reports, and there is definitely also that follow-up of seeing what exactly are the outcomes of the projects and to what extent they relate to the provisioned impact and to the foreseen objectives. So I would dare to say that to a large extent it's already foreseen in the framework that we have within the Erasmus Plus project. And as already mentioned before, what we see in the European Commission and in the projects that we support, it's not only what we have in Erasmus Plus, but we also have that social impact as a sort of red thread through all the campaigns that we also set up. As mentioned before, we have the European Week of Sport that started, but we have, for example, also our Inclusive Awards, but also our Be Active Awards, because if you look in detail to those awards, there also it's a recognition of local heroes, of people working in education, people even working in workplaces who have an impact via sport on those very local societies and communities. So in that sense, I would say that to some extent, of course, there's always margin for improvements, but I would say that we really already take into account very, very deeply the social impact that sport can have via these projects.
Great, thank you, Mr. SERNEELS. Indeed, you mentioned Erasmus Plus program, and we work a lot with this program at Sport and Citizenship. And I just would like to add that our think tank is inspired by the criterion of impact as a criterion of the selection of European project, and we found that it's an important step toward finding a common methodology. So thank you very much for sharing your opinions. I'm coming back to Marc Thibault. So after this first institutional view and approach, Marc Thibault, as Vivian HOFFMANN said during the opening speech, you have also worked with the European Commission. So we are really delighted to benefit from your expertise and the result of your research on this topic. Indeed, for several years, scientific research has tended to develop methodological tools to highlight the social impact of sports. Nevertheless, it's important to help the very interesting work done by various universities to gain even more visibility at institutional and political level. So my first question for you is, what are the different approach in the scientific literature on this topic, and what contribution can be expected from the world of scientific research?
Well, thank you for that question. It's always nice to share our insights with a larger audience outside the academic world, of course. Well, I mean, there are many studies already that have attempted to measure the social impact of sport, but it's our job to be critical. And there are some critical remarks to be made regarding the methods that have been used so far. Often there's no clear definition, for example, of measurable outcomes. There's often not taken into consideration the duration of programs or projects or policies, and often impact or effects are illustrated by anecdotal data of often, you might say, unrepresentative samples. There's more deficiencies, like a very generic perspective on sport, not taking into consideration the diversity of sport and sport activities and sport, and you might say also different subgroups. Limited testing of causality, which is a crucial element, of course. If you want to measure impact, you have to be sure that it's a result of something that you have set up. No focus on the strength or duration, for example, of the effects, nor of the focus on the, you might say, the frequency, intensity of sport programs that have been organized and delivered. And what is very strange is that there's a huge difference with the, you might say, high quality evidence that is presented by other studies on the, let's say, the sports physical health benefits, where it's very clear what really happens. And I think this illustrates basically that there's often, you might say, the idea that sports social outcomes are, you might say, self-evident, even unconditional, inevitable even. So, for example, a large study on more than 230 studies that looked at social impact of sport review found out that there's only 12% of the studies that have conducted a qualitative evaluation with intensive, descriptive, and explanatory analysis. So this certainly means that we need to be very cautious of what we found from literature and from reports that are trying to measure the social impact. I think we understand, of course, a lot of projects, they are there because they are for accountability to managers, management, and to funders. And they are all only interested actually in quantifiable outputs. And I think that's what's mentioned already in the beginning as well by one of the other speakers. So measuring the intervention effect and not understanding what actually the process is about, and how they are these processes are assumed to produce these outcomes is a tricky thing. So, and my colleague, who is a guest professor at our research group, Sport and Society at University of Brussels, Fred Coulter, has over and over emphasized the importance of, for example, taking into consideration the conditions under which programs are designed and are delivered, to take into consideration this when looking at impact. And in other words, if we see a shift, and we believe there's a necessity of a shift from, let's say, a very conventional input-output approach to a better understanding of context, of process, and of outcomes of these you might say these projects. This has led a number of you might say researchers and a group of more critical, from a critical perspective, looking at what is called a theory-based evaluation approach, where the essence is basically not on if a program or policy works, but how and why it works. What is the logic behind? What is the theory behind the program? And this relates to what is known in literature as a theory of change. What can bring about change, and what chain of results are necessary to produce outcomes? And I'm very glad that Vivian HOFFMANN mentioned our research and our outcome at a project that was financed as an Erasmus Plus collaborative partnership, because Fred Coulter, as well as some of our colleagues and I, have recently actually produced a manual, a monitor and evaluation manual, which is focusing on sport for employability organizations that use sport as a means to increase level of employability for young need people. The Monitor project used the insights from 7 partners, of which 6 were actually practitioners, and it was intended to optimize actually the impact of these organizations, and also to measure it, because that's a crucial thing, as we just found out also from the previous speakers. The manual, for example, includes guidance on how to develop such a theory of change. It helps how to define soft skill developmental outcomes and impact. It sets out a number of validated tools to measure, to do the impact measurement of these skills, as well as to inform practitioners how to administer, how to analyze data, and how to help them to build a stronger case. And I think this is one of the topics in the next round table, that the importance, of course, for practitioners, for programs to show what they are worth, and to help them to build a stronger case for external communication. So if you won't mind, I will put in the chat a link to the website where people can freely access actually the manual and all information surrounding this project.
Thank you very much. Yeah, indeed. If you can put it on the chat, it will be good. I think some of our participants will be interested in your topic. So thank you very much for your intervention. Thank you both. Your different intervention strengthen us in our will to work on this issue with different institutions. So the point you put forward can be used to establish at least a common methodology. And yeah, at Sport and Citizenship, our objective as a European think tank is to bring together your different but also complementary vision. So bringing together around the table, so a virtual table at the moment, it's a first good step to do it. But 1 hour is not enough to deal with such an important subject. So I hope this round will let this roundtable. So we would like to another in a time. So yeah, thank you very much for both of you for your intervention. I hope that our speakers have interested you as much as we did. We see indeed that there is an important work to do on both theoretical and institutional approach on the study of the social impact of sport. And I am going to close this roundtable and to start the other one. So thank you again for both of you, Michael SERNEELS and Mark Sibon, for your intervention and for participating in our conference. We're really glad. So you can, of course, stay during the next roundtable. You are more than welcome to follow the rest of the debate. And now we are going to watch, if you are going to watch a video of Mr. Frankowski from the European Parliament, who also cannot be with us today, but he would like to share some point with us, so we can watch the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank Sport and Citizenship for the invitation to this conference on measuring the social impact of sport. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in person today, but I am honored to be able to address a few points via this video message. I am currently working on the compromises to my report on the future of the European sport policy and possible ways forward, which will be voted on during the Culture and Education Committee in the European Parliament at the end of October. One of the important topics addressed in my report is the social impact of the sport and sport-related projects. As we all know, the Erasmus Plus program for 2021 to 2027 received a much higher budget, with 1.9% going to sport, which will allow it to finance more projects. While this is a step forward, I think that given the social and economic importance of sport, any future review of the program should treat sport on an equal budgetary footing with other priorities, such as youth and culture. Additional funding for sport through preparatory and pilot projects is very important. So, there is a need to increase the number of preparatory actions and pilot projects in the field of sport, as they can lead to successful results. One great example of this is the project on the social inclusion of refugees through sport, which is now part of the new edition of the Erasmus Plus program. Measuring the social impact on such initiatives in a more reliable and consistent way would provide vital data for the selection of EU-funded sport projects. In my report, I propose to establish a common methodology to better measure social impact. Additionally, there is a need to regularly update and present data on the economic impact of sport to make sure that we have reliable data for the development of evidence-based policy in the field of sport. These are some of the concrete proposals from my side, and I hope that we will have your support and get a broad majority in the European Parliament during the votes. Thank you very much for your attention, and I wish you a fruitful discussion.
So we warmly thank Mr. Frankowski for this video. And now I'm giving the floor to Alexandre Mest, former Portugal Secretary of State for Sport and Youth and lawyer at Abreu Advogados. So Alexandre Mest, the floor is yours.
Hello, Clara. Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Once again, it's an honor for us, Abreu, to be associated with you. Am I allowed to share the screen for a while, Clara, if possible? I will take only my 5 minutes, but I have a PowerPoint and I would like to share if possible.
Yes, go ahead. Please.
Okay. I'm not, it says that the host disabled participant screen sharing. Oh, now it works.
Oh, okay, great.
Okay, I will take these 5 minutes, my intervention, brief intervention with another angle, taking into account my former experience as Secretary of State for Sport, as well as my profession as a sports lawyer. And of course, I wouldn't say more than those that previously spoke about the topic and those that are going to continue the discussions. That's why I would like to point my intervention on, yes, we talk about the social impact on sport. We have no doubts about this social impact. We've just realized, for instance, the European Commission and the European Parliament intervention for that. But let's think about the legal recognition of this. If you think about the Olympic Charter says that the practice of sport is a human right. So we can really understand that in accordance with the social movement, to the Olympic movement, there's an understanding of this social impact of sport. Everybody should have access. It's a human right. So we have principles, we have values that must be taken into account. So very okay, fantastic with the Olympic Charter. But then thinking about the World Players Association and the well-known Universal Declaration of Players' Rights, we once again realize that every player has the right to access and pursue sport as a career and profession. So this approach is not larger as the Olympic Charter because it's not dedicated to the sports for all approach. It's more dedicated for professional sport. But even though there's a right to access to sport, which is very good because as long as we have more people practicing sport, even in the highest level, we have more impact on the grassroots, namely. But if we think about the international documents related human rights, unfortunately, sport is not there. Just for the sake of curiosity, in 1929, in the Geneva Convention related to the treatment of prisoners, yes, there was a reference to the practice of sports and games among prisoners. We talk today a lot about refugees. We should never forget also the important role of the social inclusion of prisoners through sport. But that was a specific convention. If we look to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is no express reference to sport. Of course, we're talking about the document from 1948, but there's no express reference to sport. Only we can indirectly think about sport when there's a reference to the right to rest and leisure or the right to freely participate in the cultural life of the community, which means that in the major document for human rights, there's no reference to sport. So where is the recognition of the social impact of sport by the states? The European Convention of Human Rights, 1953, no express reference to sport neither. Very difficult for the citizens when they feel that they don't have access to sport and inherent benefits, namely social impact, very difficult for them to invoke their right to sport. Of course, women, and when you're talking social impact of sport, we talk about the principle of equality, non-discrimination, and women, they have their own recognition through a specific convention on the elimination of all forms of discrimination against women. So equality of men and women, the same rights, the right to participate in recreational activities, sports, that's okay. A segment of a vulnerable part of the population. Once again, another segment, the Convention of the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. We have access to leisure and sporting activities, so inclusion is provided in another segment of the population. And we can also admit that even non-binding, the European Sport for All Charter of the Council of Europe and the European Sport Charter of the Council of Europe, not mentioning a human right, we can identify here a fundamental right to access to sport. That's good in the sense that we're talking about more than 40 countries across Europe. The same we can say related to the United Nations agency, UNESCO. The practice of physical education and sport is a fundamental right for all. But think about the European Union. And we are here on the European Week, celebrating the European Week for sport. We have Article 165 of the Treaty of Function of the European Union, with the reference of the European dimension in sport, with the reference of the physical and moral integrity of sportsmen and sportswomen. But we must be aware of the fact that the text has its limits, since the fact that the European Union has no direct intervention. It can only intervene as an added value to the member states. But think about also to the Council of Europe, to the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. Where is the reference of sport in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights? There's no reference to sport in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights. So what is the message that I would like to stress in this short intervention? We are consensually stressing that there's no doubt that sport has a social impact, tremendous social impact. But of course, when people don't have access to sport, namely those that are discriminated, those that don't find the facilities to do so, those that don't find the same access to sport as the others, when they want to invoke their right to access to sport, they don't have legal basis to do so. And we also can search among the constitutions of our member states. We are here people from different states. We can identify several states without a mention to sport in their own constitutions. So no reference to sport in some constitutions, no reference to sport in the European Charter of Fundamental Rights, not enough when you have non-binding instruments, and the main legal documents for human rights, no express reference to sport. So there's a gap between the main legal texts and the practice and the words that we mentioned. So in this context, when you don't have enough express or direct legal basis for sport, I do think that for the future, there's a need, and sport and citizenship and all of us in our roles, different roles, we have a mission to persuade the states for a national and supranational legal recognition of the social impact of sport. Because if we do so, there's an inherent obligation for the states, for positive actions of the states, to promote sport, and subsequently we have positive effects for the populations. So my brief and very specialized focus today for this discussion is to say we need to have legal basis in order to have more intervention, more liability for the states at national and supranational level to promote sport. Otherwise, we will have a gap between what we think must be done and the instruments to do so by the states. Thank you, Clara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mess, for this very interesting presentation. And now I will give the floor to Cyril Sénéchal for the second one table. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Clara. Okay, so I'm glad to moderate this last session today as a trustee of sport and citizenship, and also as a consultant in social innovation at Deloitte. So I see with my job that the work on social impact measurement is evolving very fast, and we have more and more companies, banks, associations that want to measure the social impacts of projects they lead or projects they support. And we face the difficulties with the tools we have already evoked. And in this particular field of a sport, with all of the social impacts we've evoked in fields such as inclusion, health, women empowerment, for instance, we have a necessity to have tools, and the idea of this roundtable is to consider several organizations and the tools they already have and the needs that remain on this topic. And I'm going to let the speakers introduce themselves and tell us if they consider that they have enough methodological tools to measure the social impact of a sport project. And we can begin with Hugo Bourbillier.
Yes, Bourbillier.
Bourbillier, sorry.
Yes, hi everyone. Thanks a lot for having me this afternoon. Thanks a lot to Sport and Citizenship for the invitation. I'm associate professor at the Rennes 2 University in France. And my research topic are impact of sport event, to say it very quickly. The question of the social impact of sport has become a part of the public debate in recent years, but there are still a lot of work to be done, and I think this is the subject of this roundtable. Just if I have 2 minutes before start the roundtable, I'd like to start to reframe the debate before about the need to think about the fact that sport isn't naturally virtuous. I think this is the first step. Even if I listened a lot of social impact in the first period of our speech, my point here is that we only can ask for funding sport program if we consider sport as a virtuous thing in any cases. We lose the game even before its beginning, because on my side, I think we won't be able to identify clearly the routes that can lead to effective social impacts. For instance, my topic is more the sporting event, so I speak about that. Social impact of sport events have been the matter of an increased interest leading to the emergence of a full-blown academic field these recent years. And originally, authors referred from a tourism perspective, where social impacts could be, I quote, all changes in the collective individual value systems, behavior patterns, community structures, lifestyle, and quality of life. But this definition, there was some already been said in the first roundtable, has been followed by many others. And a great deal of work emerged to 3 distinct periods. I'll be very quick about these three periods, sorry. The first one, at the end of the last century, referred to studies which used economic concepts to address social impact. The assessment was operated by measuring economic variables, such as the willingness to pay taxes. The main limitation of such studies, in one sentence, was that they reduced the scope of social impacts to a simple monetary trade-off. The second period, over the years 2000, rather than seeking to aggregate social impacts into a single measure, researchers and practitioners have begun to disaggregate this notion in order to explore it more deeply. And a growing number of studies are focusing on a particular social dimension of sporting events, such as the feel-good effect, the psychic income, or many more that are already been addressed before. And the third period we're still in is the reintroduction of the context at the core of the analysis through resource-based theory. I heard Mark T-Baum before, and through evidence-based theory. This approach suggests to shed light on both the resources upstream and the impacts that appear downstream the event's organization. This evolution led to a more comprehensive approach of impacts. And I think this knowledge can be used as a theoretical background when we speak about a social impact of sport like we do today. I can give you some more words about the method later. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo, and maybe Damien Combredet, you can follow up with your vision also of this social impact and methodologies.
Yes, thank you, Cyril. Can you hear and see me?
Yes.
Great. Well, I think that from a practitioner view, from a major event position, as the Games of Paris 2024, this is a big issue for us. And no, we do not have all the tools to measure our social impact the way we would love to, but we are working on it, and it's a great challenge for us. But we do not come from nowhere, as it was just mentioned. A lot has been done on that field in the past few years, and there is especially the OECD. I think you had Karen Mcguire early in the discussion, or maybe not. But we've been working with the OECD and the IOC that have an agreement to, well, to create tools to evaluate the contribution of global events to local development and to the citizen well-being, based on rigorous and evidence-based analysis. So we're not on a white sheet here. We do have recommendations to follow, and we do have experts to work with. So we are trying to follow that path, implementing the OECD recommendations and also looking at what scholars do, what the IOC recommends. The IOC has produced first legacy strategic approach for legacy in 2017, then another one in 2019 with a specific chapter on evaluation. So we are not alone. I think it's important to mention that we do not want to build our legacy on the question of measurement of social impact. We should not define our strategy depending on how we're able or not to measure it, because that, I think, would introduce a bias. I mean, there are some great general interest objectives that are very hard to measure. We know it would take years and millions of euros, and yet they are important issues that we want to promote. So I think as a major event, the capacity to measure our social impact should not determine the definition of our strategy. We define our strategy to answer social and local needs and to serve our vision, not to measure it. But once you've defined your strategy, then of course having tools is a critical issue to evaluate it and to promote it and to be convincing and to produce reliable data and results. And we are working on that. And it's especially true for events such as Paris 2024, where the social impact is a high priority for a simple reason, that reason being that we will use 90%, 95% in fact, of venues that are existing or temporary. So we clearly are a major event of a new era that is not focused on venues, but that is focused on social impact. So I think that issue has never been so important than for a major event like us. And for the first time, I think we have taken, well, I don't know. I hate when people say always for the first time. Maybe we're not, but I can tell you that we're taking the issue from the very beginning. We started to work on it, as you know, on the bid phase, and then very early in the process, as soon as we got the games. And I think I could tell you more about the 3 tools that we have in the strategy, but maybe you want to move on.
Yeah, maybe later on. And I think that this is a key point to begin very early on with this measurement, even when the strategy is being built. And to finish with the the last speaker, I'm going to the company field with Decathlon. François de Launois, can you tell us also if you think you have enough tools for the sport projects you work with?
Yes, thank you very much. So François Delma from Decathlon. I'm working for the partnership we just got last year. So actually, I want to precise, I've been working on the topic for 3 months now because we are early last comer in terms of partnership. So I'm glad to hear Damien. We've never met before, but I think it would be good to meet in order to exchange on the strategies that Decathlon wants to implement with the games. Just to give you a quick introduction about the partnership and what we want to do regarding Decathlon. What we like to say internally and like what we like to say externally as well is to say that the project for Decathlon is not to make the games. Our project is to leave a legacy thanks to the games. So all our strategies are focused on what is the legacy that we leave for Decathlon for the society. So legacy in terms of sustainable development, in terms of social impact, in terms of digital experience, etc., etc. So social impact, of course, is a main concern for us. And today we are just starting, so we are establishing our strategies, focusing on youth and disabled sports for disabled people. We decided to focus on these 2 topics. And currently we are trying, like you said, Damien, we set our strategies and now we are trying, to put some figures in it, because as we are in the company field, if you want to set up a project, today the only figures that matters is the return on investment. So how much do you bring basically? So it's really important for us to be able to measure this social impact that we have and to be able to prove that actually if you have a social impact, it will be valuable for your business as well. So to link the social impact to your business is crucial for us. And actually, one of the legacy we want to leave with this project is to be able to measure social impact and to be able to enhance it and to put it, to highlight it. Like for instance, imagine someone managing a Decathlon store. Today, the only figures, the only KPI that he has is actually the economic figures, and how to put the social impact figures into his global investment plan. This is one of the questions that we have. So today we are looking for KPIs for our own projects, and the limits that we have is that we are struggling to find smart KPIs. So most of the time when we find some KPIs, they are not really easily measurable, or they are not really simple. And so we had some ideas about how to measure the social impact, but all the time is not really easy. And but we do need this measurement because we want to ensure that we are not in a social washing way of doing, and to ensure that we are going in the right direction actually, and to prove to our CEOs and directors that we are doing this to be valuable for our business. So definitely today we lack methodological measurements, and even we are now trying to work with external companies to advise us on this topic. And even with external companies, we find that they are struggling as well to present us valuable KPIs. So definitely we are really pleased to be here today to start the thinking about these points.
Yes, and that's what is very different from what has been done on the environmental impact, for instance, because there are lots of KPIs we all use, and maybe now, Hugo, you can tell us more about how fundamental research can be used to strengthen the social impact measurement of projects on the ground, because we know there are lots of researchers working on this topic, and you've mentioned that it's been this way for years, but how can it be used for project concretely on sport events or the impact of day-to-day practice?
Yes, thank you. So we are all French in this session, and everyone will have noticed that I have the lowest quality level of English, but be sure I will do my very best. I need to mention before going into the method and the limits of collaboration between scholars and political decision makers and difficulties that we can address. I want to mention this relationship because this relationship between scholars, political decision makers, actors, stakeholders on the field is at once fascinating, complex, always in process, and it's absolutely central regarding social impact assessment and its political consequences. This relationship is a very old subject. Max Weber, Emile Durkheim, founding fathers of sociology, fostered this topic in their times. And this topic still carries some limits that are really hard to overcome. I'm going to mention some of them, 3, 4, through the scope of social impacts and of about my experience on this field. The first one, first of all, there are different objectives and rationales, where the politicians, the lobbyists, the technicians on the field search for clear results and advocacy tools. The scholar is led by a permanent doubt and a profound need to question everything, including his own perception of reality. This is the first difficulty. Secondly, there are different temporalities. The time of research process and the time of political action, even more political communication, are totally different, of course. For instance, I participated in a study about the social impact of football Euro 2016 with the city of Paris. Our methodological setup was at time ambitious and heterogeneous, made up of quantitative and qualitative data. And our research also took place over an extended period of time in order to consider the legacy. Obviously, the time for collecting, processing, analyzing all the data was very, very long. And the sponsors of the study were expecting communicable results from September 2016. Of course, we gave them preliminary results according to our contact agreement, but it was far, far less interesting than what we came up with later in several articles, including a full book in 2019, 3 years after. Conclusion of my point here, the city communicated, for instance, about the success of the Parisian fan zone almost only on the basis of the attendance, which I have to say says absolutely nothing about the real social effects perceived by the public inside the fan zone. Though there are some results in our study on this matter, but it's impossible to communicate easily on it through a press statement, even more 3 years before we analyze it. The third point is a distinct language. The words, the concept, the frameworks are sometimes not the same or have different meanings, which can lead to misunderstanding and can be very time-consuming. And the fourth and final point that follows the 3 previous ones, in my opinion, are all the tools to carry out the fieldwork and especially the valorization of results. This is particularly well illustrated by the case of the social impact of sports events with the use of indicators, which have the ambition to translate expected results into performance indicators such as inputs, outputs, or outcomes indicators. Of course, OECD, IOC works for years with this kind of tools, but it's sometimes difficult to go on with appropriate ones about our topic. For instance, qualitative tools are implicitly distanced in the OECD or IOC recommendation note about indicators because they are time consuming and they can be standardized. Here the problem is huge, and I'll take 2 examples I faced when I worked for the OECD last summer about the social impact measurement strategy of Paris 2024. The first example, to identify the way in which school dropout will be affected by a sporting event, the PISA ranking was considered. We, of course, said directly that it's absolutely nothing to understand subtle mechanisms with such global indicators. Educational sciences are clear about the fact we do need monitoring cohorts over time in order to understand the learning mechanisms of young students. A second example, more detailed, about employment rates. Academic literature shows that employment, that's not my speech, that's what scholars say, employment effects, in particular for underprivileged groups, are almost impossible to measure from existing performance indicators. Still, several options are available, but none is fully satisfactory. For instance, we could measure the work in person per hours generated by the games through a bottom-up approach. But again, for instance, this method will only capture the short-term effect and doesn't distinguish between additional hours for those already in employment or new job creation for the unemployed. I could have given many more examples, but now you understand that in view of what I've just mentioned, most scholars involved in this subject will prefer to talk about analysis rather than measurement to characterize social effects because they are more or less immaterial. Here, the stakeholders and decision makers could be reproached for oversimplifying reality by using indicators that can only reflect at best a very partial approach to the social consequences of events. And the academics, of course, can be reproached for over-assuming the complexity of reality, and as a result, the impossibility of accurately reporting in the sense of measuring the effects, and consequently risking to give up the quest for a process improvement, which is an option, of course. So positive things remain here. Scholars' work serve as a basis for reflection. For instance, in my experience, our book about social impact of the Football Euro 2016 was read by a lot of public stakeholders. Methodological attempt we made serve as experiment and feed some of the public stakeholders. That's how it works. It's not easy, but we can't stop for that, quite the contrary. Though we need to be ambitious also in funding such research and accept that results in this matter can't be always framed as a number, which can be easily communicable. Here are the stakes, in my opinion. Here, if I can have 1 minute again, and I conclude with that, the task ahead is very arduous here, and plural experimental approaches are all welcome in view of the task at hand. What we can at least agree on is that the importance of this issue of not necessarily measuring, you'll understand me, but to analyze, to understand, to assess, because if we are not able to account for it precisely, it will be impossible then to advocate for voluntarist political action. If the importance of sport is obvious during the Olympic period, this is way much less the case in the daily life of many people in various societies where government have to face many political arbitrations. Though it would seem that sport can be a starting place to address numerous societal problems, as Alexandre Mestre explained. But I think only with a strong political support, we can agree on that, both on funding sport programs and on funding studies to understand and analyze through qualitative and quantitative methods the effects of such programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Hugo. So I think you mentioned a real limit of this measurement with this idea of analysis that has to be led, and that can be on the long run and not always adapted to the political and operational needs we have on the ground. And I think, Damien, you also mentioned another risk of this idea of impact measurement with the fact that we don't have to conceive a strategy depending on our ability to measure or not the impact, and I think it's a key point, because when we are in a reporting perspective, sometimes we forget what we really want to do and the real impact we want to have. But you also said that you have been developing and using some tools for the Paris Olympic Games. So maybe you can explain how it can be interesting and how you can build these tools, even if you don't have maybe the time researchers have to work.
Thank you, Cyrielle. I really do not pretend at all to have answers to all the challenges we're discussing right now, but at least it's good to put them on the table and discuss them and try to tackle them. And that we are working on. So very modestly, but with ambition too. Yes, I can give you a few words about what we're working on. First, I'd like to emphasize the fact that I fully agree with Francois about the fact that what we're doing right now, working on these issues of how to measure, evaluate, and analyze the social impact of sports and sporting events is in itself a legacy. Francois said that this is something that they want to give, to share with tomorrow other Decathlon shops and stores, and that's something that we want to do with major events. What we're doing, we're not just doing for Paris 2024, we're doing for the next editions of the Games, we're doing it for other major events, we're doing it with the DIJOP, la Délégation Interministérielle aux Jeux Olympiques et Paralympiques, and the DGZ, the French delegation for major events in France. So this is a methodological legacy that we want to build. And we're also doing it for small events and for small clubs. The core, of course, you cannot evaluate and analyze the impact of the Games with the impact of a small sports clubs in a rural place of France. But we believe that there is a core set of indicators that can be relevant for little, medium, and big major events, and that this core set of indicators can be tomorrow a very important tool for small actors to help them better promote what they do. We all know that some actors in the French and European framework are specialists to promote what they do, and others are not. And there are some people who do things that are incredible, who save lives, who change a life of a student who's on the verge of losing it, who changed the life of someone who's curing from a serious disease, but they do not have the power and the tools to promote that and to let public and private funders know about it. So what we want to leave as a legacy, to build, I prefer the verb to build as to leave, is building that legacy for small stakeholders and help them tomorrow go see their local council, go see their local sponsor, and have the tools to better analyze and present and value and promote their social impacts. This being said, just a few words about what Hugo Bourbière said also. He raised two very important points about timing. Of course, we cannot evaluate a legacy at the day of the closing ceremony, or nor in the next weeks. This is something that the IOC asks of us, to have a report not only 1 year before the Games, but also 3 years and 5 years afterwards. So this is the timing that Hugo mentioned, and I think it's very important. And this is not the only reports and analyses that can be done. Hugo mentioned the report that was made, I think, with Dominique Charrier and Charlotte Parmentier. This is something that was done with the city of Paris, but of course, what we do is not the only things that will be done, and we hope that other scholars will use the Games to conduct works on that field. But on our side, we will do reports 3 and 5 years afterwards. And just a last word about what Hugo said about the importance to go beyond indicators and evaluation. This is a major issue. As Francois mentioned, we do not have the relevant, smart, easy to measure indicators right now to embrace really what a major event, a sporting event can have as an impact. And analyzing is really the key. This is why, to answer your question, Cyrielle, we've been working on 3 different tools. The first one is the most basic one. It is an inventory. The first thing we need is to gather some data. What do the schools all across France do? How many of them do the 30 minutes of daily physical activity we try to promote? How many of them invite a club in their local sports equipment? Do we have an impact in these schools? Do the program we promote have a real impact? The first thing before you can evaluate and analyze them is to have the knowledge about all those things in the cities, terre de jeu, in the schools, and all across friends in every stakeholder, every association and clubs that we promote and that we fund with the endowment fund Paris 2024. We need to know that. So we are prototyping a tool that is called Aura, l'outil de recensement des actions héritage, that will be that online inventory, helping everyone to monitor and register the actions and the outputs of these actions. The second step is aiming at going beyond outputs and trying to measure some outcomes. And for that, you cannot have just indicators. You need to do case studies. You need to do research works. This is something that Hugo mentioned. And for that, we know that some of them will take a few months or years. Some of them will take 2, 3, 5 years. We need to accept that timing. And we've been working with various scholars, and we are trying to put that in place right now. How do we launch some studies? How do we also work with INSEE, with INGEP, with ERDS to hop on board of current studies that are being conducted? Lots of things that are being done with an extra funding or with just sometimes the extra question. We can use what the French scholar and research world can do already. I mean, we do not need to invent everything. A lot of things are being done, and sometimes just adding a question about sport practice in a questionnaire that INSEE was going to do anyway can be the easiest way to gather some data in an efficient way. And also sometimes we will need to launch specific ad hoc dedicated work studies, and that we will do with some various research practitioners and such as laboratories, etc. That we are putting that in place right now, and we hope to be ready starting in early 2022. And the last tool of our evaluating and analyzing our social impact strategy is the gathering of all this. We will have some outputs through the inventory. We will have some qualitative analysis from the various case studies we will conduct. And then we will need someone to put that all in a comprehensive, understandable report, and that is what we call the analytical report. So first, inventory, second, case studies, and third, analytical report as regular report, embracing both the data, the outputs, and the outcomes and the analysis in a report 1 year before the games, 1 year after, 3 years after, 5 years after. So I hope that these, orientations, Streamworks tackles the challenge we're facing. At least that's what we're trying.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so numerous tools to measure this impact in the long run, and for François, actually, what would be your needs with this social impact measurement? Because you were talking about having other means to measure projects than return on investment, and how could you convince internally the top management to work on some projects thanks to these tools? How do you conceive this?
Yes, definitely. So speaking for my company, I have to say that today we are struggling to promote projects with low return on the investments, saying that the only KPIs that are really considered are the how much money do you bring back to the company, or it's the main KPI. So our work today is really to set these KPI tools and all the things that we can set to measure this social impact. And we want to really put these KPIs once they will be found, or the set of KPIs to put them into the company strategy. Today in Decathlon, green strategy is in every teams. Everyone is able to measure their full CO2 footprints, and it's been a huge and long work to do so. And I think it's time for us to start the same work on social impact. So for us, of course, it's really important that it will help us really to promote this kind of projects, because today in every stores, in every place that we are in Decathlon, people are, you know, they have initiatives. They want to act in social environment, and we are all convinced that we are going in the right direction doing so, but we cannot measure the real impact that we have on our ecosystem and directly in our business. And I think we have to be able to consider the impact we have as well on our ecosystem. So meaning externally, considering that if we have a stable ecosystem, a stable society, it will help us to have a stable business as well. So of course, proving the social impact for us will be crucial in terms of promoting the social sporting projects.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. And maybe to be on time, if you may just have a word to conclude on maybe because on the first roundtable we spoke about tools and common tools, maybe a vision, some idea of what could be what we are missing to have a common tool today, and maybe an expectation you have.
Yes, maybe not about a tool, but sorry, Francois, you wanted to.
No, it's okay. Go on. Go.
I'll be brief. Just by saying that there's a consensus in the academic literature, that's not always the case, about the fact that a sport event hasn't an impact, an intrinsic impact. There are no impact without intervention of public stakeholders. We saw that about the Euro 2016 in Paris. And this is something Paris 2024, we heard Damien Combredet knows. I think it's already done on a daily basis, but for this to happen, project leaders must seek support from these actors. And a legacy field in this matter is really interesting and must be fostered. This range of results are an example, but it must be complete by other tools to understand effects on local, but also on sometimes individual scale, which is really difficult to do so without case studies like you mentioned, and without scholar work. Thank you.
Okay. I don't know if François, you wanted to add something, but.
Okay. Just to conclude, for me, the main stake is really to have a common approach, because data is key to find measurements. And in Decathlon, we have a lot of applications that we have customers on it, and we are able to extract some data from it, but actually it's not enough. And I think the power of being together with the Olympic Games or with other public people. So it will be really interesting to gather the data, to be really able to figure out what is the current situation and what is the gap really that we have to do. Are we going in the right direction? And for us alone in Decathlon, we are not able to gather this data. So it will be really interesting to have a common approach in order to highlight that we are going in the right direction, and highlight as well that we are doing the relevant action to focus our energy in the right place.
Okay, yeah, a collective approach, and to be able to compare also data and projects, and maybe Damien, it's the same idea you.
Exactly.
Also,
just a quick reaction to what Hugo said. I agree with him that a major event cannot have an impact without an intervention. Hugo said a public intervention. In fact, I think it goes beyond. It is a private, public, sports associative intervention. It is it works for us all. But yes, fully agree with François. We need a continuous and shared approach in order to convince, because I don't know how we are like 40 today. I think we're all convinced over the same thing. We need to convince those who are not convinced yet. And for that, we need a comprehensive, global, and continuous approach to show them that there is a robust methodology to evaluate what we do, analyze what we do, and to be convincing enough to make sure that public decision makers realize the power of sporting events and sport and take action on that.
Yeah, and that's also why it's interesting to have the three of you in this panel, because we have a research company and major sport event, and we all want to work together, and this is also the idea of this conference. So I would like to thank you, the three of you, for your participation, and also all the people who attended the conference. And sport and citizenship is going to send a memorandum of understanding next week for us to keep on working with European and international institutions on this topic, and to go beyond what we currently do on this topic.
All the work you do to promote these issues. We need moments like that, and then written, exactly memorandums to go forward. This is very useful and going in the right direction, I think.
Okay, so thank you all, and I think we can now close the conference.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye.